I'm Allison Canody. I'm the Director of Forest Health and Monitoring, and today I'm going to talk about forest pests in Maine. And I'm going to start by talking about emerald ash borer. Emerald ash borer, as you know, is an invasive wood-boring insect, and it was detected in Maine for the first time in 2018 in two distinct locations, both in northern Maine near Madawaska and in southern Maine on the New Hampshire border of York County. This detection means that there's some impacts on the movement of ash tree material within Maine into areas outside of Maine. As far as the infestations in Maine, we're seeing more damage in the south than in the north, and that's partly related to the infestation and also related to the forest type. So the infestation to the south is probably a little bit older, and it's also on the front of a large infestation that extends through New Hampshire and throughout most of the eastern United States. And then the infestation on the north is adjacent to a small infestation in Canada, which was just a spot infestation. So it's a much smaller population than it's building from. It's probably a little bit younger. And also the forest itself in the north does not have as much ash to carry the emerald ash borer further. The photos here show some of the damage that you can expect to see from emerald ash borer. This tree here is exhibiting blonding, which is what happens when the woodpeckers go after the ash borer underneath the bark and take out the exterior of the trees. These show different stages of the galleries of emerald ash borer. The ash borer larva hatches from an egg and tunnels beneath the bark and creates these sinuous expanding galleries as it matures. And when populations are really heavy, those galleries will crisscross each other. So what does that mean in the terms of management? We're encouraging people to not kiss all of their ash goodbye. In other words, not harvest all their ash. The ash species have different levels of tolerance of damage from emerald ash borer, with white ash being the most tolerant, and green and black both being very intolerant to attack by emerald ash borer. Within white ash, in one study in the core area of infestation in the Michigan area, there was really highly variable survival among white ash in that study. So they looked at 28 different sites, and across those sites, anywhere from 0 to 100% of the white ash stems were surviving. And as many as 75% of the total stems were surviving. They had much greater survival in the small size classes, so your seedling, sapling, your pole-sized trees, because it was trees over sapling size, and less survival in the saw log size classes. They also only had ash up to about 17.5-inch diameter in that study, so there weren't any larger ash in the study, so we can't really say much about what would have happened in those larger size classes. But the study does point to the importance of keeping smaller diameter ash on the landscape. It can help to preserve the genetic diversity within the white ash group and also help keep ash and its functions in the forest for a longer term. There are a number of insects, for instance, that can only feed on ash to reproduce, and ash can be important in a number of other ways as well. Keeping small ash on the landscape also helps to slow the spread of the emerald ash borer infestation and will help us to establish biological control, which may help to perpetuate ash in the forest. I mentioned that there are impacts on movement of ash tree material. So currently there is a quarantine enforced through state authority, and there are two distinct quarantine areas, one in the north and a larger one in the south. The quarantine impacts movement of ash tree material from these areas that are in the pink hatch to other areas of the state and other areas of the continent. What it impacts is things like logs, chips, firewood of all hardwood species, and green lumber. There is no longer a federal quarantine on emerald ash borer in the United States, but several states have their own quarantines. And in addition, there is a quarantine in Canada on emerald ash borer. Within Maine, in order to move ash wood from these areas that are hatched into the areas of the state that are shaded in white, you need to have an agreement with the Maine Forest Service. And also the receiver in that area needs an agreement with the Maine Forest Service as well. And those can be set up by contacting our office, either through foresthealth@maine.gov or at 207-287-2431. Within those regulated areas, that area hatched in pink, we do encourage people to follow best management practices to help slow the spread of the infestation from infested areas within that area to uninfested areas. And in order to do that, you would do things such as moving ash short distances, especially during the adult flight period. So the beetles will be flying in the spring and summer months. To move roundwood whenever possible, only between October 1st and April 30th. That's when the insects are in the logs as larvae and not flying out of them as adults to find new homes to lay eggs. If you are working in creating a chipped product, then inwoods chipping is preferred because the chipping is fairly destructive to those larvae. And when you do move material, even within the regulated area, just make sure that people know that it is regulated if they're going to be moving it further on so that they are not moving it in violation of the quarantine. We also would like your help in monitoring for emerald ash borer. You can learn the signs of emerald ash borer by visiting our website, maine.gov/EAB. And outside the areas where we know emerald ash borer is established, we would really appreciate help in reporting damage. And also, if you're interested in creating a trap tree to monitor spread of emerald ash borer, that's when you girdle a tree in the spring and then fell it in the fall and look for signs of these galleries underneath the bark. If you're interested in that, you can contact us at foresthealth@maine.gov. So I've put a few questions here at the end of each section. In this particular one, the question is, how can you help slow the spread of emerald ash borer? And I'm going to pause just a little bit to allow time for you to think about that and for the video to be paused. Moving on to Asian longhorn beetle. Asian longhorn beetle is another invasive wood borer. It's not known in Maine. It is a pest of a number of different hardwood species and actually genera. And most infestations of this pest in North America have been recognized first by the public and reported to the federal agency that regulates invasive pests. You can learn how to recognize this pest by going onto our website at maine.gov/ALB. And you can also find a link to report the suspected either damage or insects that are Asian longhorn beetle on this website. And you will note that there are a number of areas in the United States where Asian longhorn beetle has been detected and eradicated. That's those in green on this map. And then there are 4 distinct areas where Asian longhorn beetle has been detected and has not yet been eradicated. And the most recent find is a fairly large infestation down in South Carolina. In this instance, the Asian longhorn beetle's acting a little bit differently than it does up north. It can actually be in an adult stage pretty much throughout the year down there. And so they're having quite a time in both delimiting the infestation, figuring out how big it is, and also going through the eradication procedure because they're dealing with swamps and alligators and snakes and much more fecund beetle down there. So how do you recognize the Asian longhorn beetle? It's a very large insect. You've all heard this before probably. It's over an inch in length in general. They're shiny black and they have bold white markings on their bodies. We have other insects that look pretty similar here in Maine. We have a whole number of longhorn beetles, including this one, which is a northeastern sawyer, but there are a number of others that are related to this particular insect as well that are native here in Maine. There is a striking click beetle called the Adelgid that is a predator of wood boring larvae, so it's often found near declining hardwood trees, and it is also black and white, but it has these large eye spots on the front of its body. Other longhorn beetles like the broad-necked root borer, and even this seed bug is one that's frequently mistaken for Asian longhorn beetle. Asian longhorn beetle damage can cause structural impacts to trees, as is shown here. This particular image was taken after an ice storm near Worcester, Massachusetts. And you can see on the interior of this broken stem, there's all sorts of tunneling from the larvae of Asian longhorn beetle. When the larvae are finished developing, they develop into adults and they pupate. And then the adults exit. And then when they chew their way out, they make these perfectly round exit holes. And then just above this exit hole is what's called an egg niche. It's where the female chews into the bark in order to create a place where she can deposit an egg. Even more evidence of Asian longhorn beetle attack, areas of missing bark on the stems of trees, such as in this maple, staining in the bark. And again, those perfectly round exit holes, in this case, you can see that the exit holes are about the same diameter as a standard Sharpie marker. So again, pausing, how can you help stop Asian longhorn beetle spreading into Maine? I'm going to switch gears here and talk about a sucking pest, the Hemlock woolly Adelgid. This is another invasive insect, and there is a quarantine in place on Hemlock woolly Adelgid. Hemlock woolly Adelgid is found in Maine. It's found mostly in coastal Maine with some disjunct populations in the Sebago Lake area, both Fry Island, Raymond areas right around there. The quarantine affects movement of hemlock branches. So both whole and chipped hemlock branches can readily spread Hemlock woolly Adelgid. And so there's a quarantine on those branches. The quarantine was expanded to encompass areas from York County all the way to eastern Hancock County in 2020. And then also last year, we had our first detection of Hemlock woolly Adelgid in a Hancock County forest trees. So we had previous detections of Hemlock woolly Adelgid that had been moved on planted hemlock trees. And this was our first detection of it in the forest in 2020. You can actually help slow the spread of Hemlock woolly Adelgid, again, by timing your harvest. So similar to emerald ash borer, if you time your harvest to when the life stage of the insect isn't present that can be easily spread, then you can help reduce the spread of this pest. So you can concentrate your harvests in August to February. During that time of year, the eggs and the crawlers are shown in this picture here, are not present. And those eggs and crawlers are what can spread a population other than moving rooted hemlock trees. All Adelgids, all Hemlock woolly Adelgids in Maine are female. So it actually only takes one egg or one crawler finding a host in order to start a new infestation. If you do harvest in March through July, be sure to clean your equipment between sites. Also think about your clothing. If you're going from an infested area to an area that's not infested, you can actually carry these buggers on you on your clothing. And whenever possible, keep the harvested material within the quarantine area. If you are going to ship it outside the quarantine area, notify your receivers so that they can be sure that they have the right documentation in place in order to receive that regulated material. And this question, pretty similar to the last couple, how can you help slow the spread of Hemlock woolly Adelgid? And this photo here shows you a close-up of the eggs of this beast. Really switching gears here and moving to a native pest, I'm going to give you a brief update on spruce budworm. So spruce budworm is a native pest with real cyclical populations. It goes from basically being extremely rare to being extremely abundant. And right now we're in a phase where the populations of spruce budworm are building. They've been building over the last 5 or 6 years. We've been noticing increases in our catches, in our pheromone traps, and our light traps. But 2020 was notable because it was the first time that we actually saw the later instar, the larger larvae of spruce budworm, as I've shown right here, in Maine since the collapse of the last outbreak. So not only could you see these larger larvae, you could also see the defoliation evidence from them, their pupae and the adults in Maine in the northern tier of the state in June and July of last year. So what's going to happen when we have the spruce budworm outbreak here in Maine? Some landowners are going to follow an early intervention strategy approach. It's basically similar to what is being applied in Atlantic Canada. And it's also really similar to how the US Forest Service and USDA APHIS is working to help suppress gypsy moth population spread. So it takes an approach of suppressing the populations before they build to outbreak levels. And so in order to do that, you actually need to have some pretty intensive data on population that includes overwintering larval surveys, and they look for thresholds where the branches, where there are more than 7 larvae per branch on the host trees during the overwintering period. And the dots on this map here represent all of the overwintering larval samples that were taken by cooperators in a study led by the Cooperative Forest Research Unit. And there was one site in 2020 that exceeded that threshold of 7 larvae per branch. We also did look at budworm defoliation last year, and the map here on the left shows the defoliation levels at a number of sites that were looked at in July of last year. And you can see that defoliation ranged from just over 0% to just under 40%, and the 60 sites that were spread throughout this area. This is where the defoliation was readily evident from the ground. So in New Brunswick, as I mentioned, they look at suppressing populations as they build towards outbreak conditions. So they're tamping out hotspots. In contrast, across the border in Quebec, they're using a foliage protection strategy, which is treating the trees that are being fed upon in order to prevent mortality, basically. And you can see that from the early intervention approach, there's going to be a number of treatments in 2021, with one quite adjacent, quite close to Maine's border here. And then the last question, I believe, is what makes spruce budworm different from the other insects discussed in this presentation? And I'll pause for you to think about that for a little while. I've mentioned that both of these pictures, this is a 2019 trap catch of spruce budworm, and this is 2020 damage in Maine. So what else? I mean, that was just a really brief overview of a few pests. There's a whole lot of other ones that we're looking out for, and we appreciate your help in looking out for them. They include things like gypsy moth, which is long established in Maine, but whose populations appear to be building, especially in the southern part of the state. Oak wilt, which has not yet been detected in Maine, but has been seen in New York in a number of places. Beech leaf disease, which again has not been found in Maine, but has been seen as far east as Massachusetts. And brown-tail moth, which is becoming rather widespread in Maine. We had over 150,000 acres of damage last year mapped across Maine. So how do you learn about these other pests? You can sign up for our conditions reports. And if you see something off or you see something we're looking for in those reports, if you could report it, we'd really appreciate it. And then I'll just mention that on the website, we do have a page dedicated to invasive threats, which is maine.gov/forestpests. Thank you for your attention. Please do reach out to foresthealth@maine.gov or 207-287-2431 if you have any questions or if you see something of concern. Thank you.